Paul Hollis, author of the Hollow Man series, owner of Hollow Man Publishing, and Frank Fiore from the Frank Fiore Show. How are you, Frank? And we're going to talk today about the 8 rules of writing. And you wrote a blog on this article years ago. And why did you decide to write this?
Well, because when I write my novels, when I write my fiction, I follow these rules, the rules of screen to print. That's what I call them, meaning that using the screenwriting rules, when you're writing your fiction in order to keep your book on track and well written. So I put together these 8 rules for writing screen to print. And they basically take screenwriting rules to be used when you're writing your fiction or your novel.
All right, let's just jump into them. Rule number one is think movie scenes, not chapters. Explain why.
Yeah, if you think about movie scenes, uh, one of the main things is that there's not a lot of narration in a movie, which means that what you want to think is as a scene and not a chapter. If you're writing chapters, you start getting into the writing fiction mode, and you start doing things with long narrative descriptions or what have you, and uh, and very little dialogue. But well, screenplays live on dialogue. In fact, it is mostly dialogue, maybe 95%, 95% dialogue. Any kind of narration is left up to maybe 2 paragraphs, one to 2 paragraphs in the beginning, just to kind of set the scene, and after that, the dialogue has to carry the story. And so, if you think in terms of a scene, all right, if you look at a movie, there's not somebody narrating it, and that they're letting the actors speak their lines, and that brings the story forward.
Yeah, and it makes sense because when you're able to bring the story forward, people see, okay, this really fits well, and they can picture it. Because if you're thinking about scenes, you're seeing it, it's transforming itself in so many ways.
Right. You want to, I mean, when people read my books, they say they can visualize it just like it's been written for the screen. And that's how you want to approach it. You want to write that chapter and looking like it would look like on a wide screen, right? The dialogue and the minor touch-ups as far as about the narrative and the scene and where the environment. If there's any conflict starting, you want to introduce it, and that's it. And then after that, the dialogue has to carry the story.
Right. And then when the dialogue carries a story, it makes it so much easier. Okay. Rule number two, show, don't tell. What does that mean?
Well, that's it. If you're any kind of writer, you've heard that you're supposed to show, not tell. Okay, you want to show what's going on in your story and not tell it. Okay, the telling it is narration. All right, and people reading the story are going to get bogged down with the narration. If you could say the same thing with dialogue and showing what's happening, not saying that it's uh, not telling the reader what's happening, then you're going to have a more vibrant, dynamic storytelling. This reflects back to rule number one. Okay, you're writing scenes, which are mostly dialogue and not chapters, which people write chapters without that rule. They're writing narration.
Okay. And I, where did you come up with that idea with show, not don't
Well,
tell?
to tell you the truth, I broke or I did read lots of fiction when I was young, mostly science fiction and what have you. But and the old golden age of science fiction, if you read stories from Highland or Bradbury, and you'll realize right away that their text is very brief, and the story is carried through dialogue, showing and not telling. And so I applied that later on when I'm writing my books. And I found later on that that rule, show don't tell, is part of the one of the most important rules when you're writing fiction. So yeah, that's how I blended it. And that's where I got the experience from.
Interesting. I definitely need to do that, and you learn from your experience, and that's why you should contact someone like Frank today. All right. Next rule is rule 4. Try to create fiction, friction, tension, or conflict in every scene. Good movies do that. Explain.
Right. Look at a good movie, one that you like and entertains you. Almost every scene has some sort of conflict or friction in it. And I don't mean people beating up each other, and that's a form of conflict, but more not just physical conflict, but psychological and emotional. And if you look at any movie, look at any scene, and it just doesn't sit there. It shows a relationship, a confrontation, a friction, or some sort of emotional disturbance between the characters. And so when you're looking at your chapter or looking at your scene, say, where's the conflict? Where's the friction? Right? In order to make the scene come alive. If it just sits there and lays there and you're just describing what's going on without any conflict or friction, then you're going to have a dull chapter, a very dull scene.
Yeah, and that dull chapter, that dull scene, forget about it, right? It's not something that people want. What kind of movies have you seen that you really like that kind of
Oh,
thing
well,
and based on that rule?
every good movie in any genre will do that. All you have to do is look for it. In fact, most of the time you don't even see it because it's done so well. So in any genre, in any movie, every one of them somewhere, most 9 times out of ten, it has kind of conflict or friction between the characters or between the environment or something like that.
Paul, how do you do that in your writing?
Well, uh, uh, that's a good question. What as far as the showing and telling kind of thing is that I use a lot of sensory images, taste and feel and smells and sight kind of things. But I agree with Frank that it's all character driven. Every any good plot has the character driven, um, and even comedies really have that conflict there. And yeah, every scene should have a conflict if it's not a connector kind of a scene, from one theme to another. But generally, I usually end my chapters or scenes with some kind of conflict to keep a reader reading into the next chapter. Oh, like what's going to happen now?
Hmm. Okay.
That's correct. That's correct.
All right.
So if you've written your chapter or your scene and it's done and there's no conflict or any kind of friction or any kind of emotional uh, discord in it, go back and add it.
All right.
And
Number
that solves the problem also of showing versus telling. Yeah, because now you're showing the conflict, not telling it. So that again, these rules overlap with each other. And if they knit it together correctly, you're going to have a good fiction book.
number 5 is write conversationally and kill the semicolon.
Yeah. Uh, proper grammar when you want to go dash it or when you want to make a comment right after the sentence or during the sentence. People put these semicolons in, and though it may be grammatically correct, don't do it. Use a comma. Uh, and when you write, you should write conversationally. You should how people talk. And your writing should reflect that. Uh, if you've got the not just dialogue, but the way you do any part of the chapter or the scene. And remember, there's some woman Parker by the name of Parker quoted saying that the two best things that you can do for give to a young writer is the elements of style, number one, and number two, and kill them before they before they read it. So the idea there that don't think that you're writing literature and you're writing a fiction story. People want to read it and that they want to get on with the story. They don't want to get bogged down by literary stuff. And so that's where that rule comes in.
Okay. Very interesting stuff so far, Frank. It makes you really think about things, and I wouldn't have known that. Number six, plot, of course, drives the story. But what drives the plot? Characters do.
When I talk to people to say, how do you write a story? How do you write a book? How do you write a fiction book? And I said, well, first of all, you hang a plot on a wire, what I call is a wireframe, right? And you just hang from the beginning, middle to the end. Here's how the plot evolves. Here's how it becomes a story. But what drives that plot? What drives those plot points? Well, obviously characters, right? And the characters will drive the plot. But what drives characters? Well, their values, their identity, and what have you. So you know your characters well, and you use the rule that the characters drive plot, and uh, their beliefs, their values, or what have you, that drives them, or their behavior. I would like to behavior. Behavior drives the characters. So if you remember that little string, then you know that I have a plot, got the plot points there. I need the characters to drive that plot at any one point in time, and also have to have a believable behavior from that character in order to drive that plot. So that's what I mean by that.
Okay. All right. And then after you kind of get that from the plot, number seven, the reversal or the all is lost momentum.
Yeah, if you look at movies, all of them have something like that, either very strongly or very lightly in it. The best description, of course, is the romance novels, okay, or romantic movie. Here's the characters moving along, everything is going peachy keen, and then all of a sudden something happens to him, and the whole plot goes to crap. His whole life goes to crap, and he has to start all over again. That's true for any story. If you look at it, they say, "Gee, look at we're doing good." It looks like the protagonist is going to get the antagonist. It looks like it's getting. And then all of a sudden, something blows up, and he's right back to where he began before. And that's a good technique. And I use that a lot in the books that I've written. Uh, where one of them is the Jeremy Nash book, where I have a character that just seems, in fact, I have the character in each one. Seems like that they're definitely the allies for the protagonist. And then somewhere in the book, they turn on them, and they say, "Wow, where'd that come from?" And that's also good that the reader enjoys that kind of stuff. So you have to put that in there somewhere if you can. The all is lost the moment, and it gives your book, your story, more richness to it.
And the last rule is the dismissal.
Right. You're reading your reader is reading your story, and you got the characters in there, and the major or major characters, not characters that just appear once and you get rid of them, so that's no problem. But you've been following this character through the book, and all of a sudden you end the book, but you haven't dismissed them, meaning that what happened to them? All of a sudden they disappear, right? You got to be able to dismiss all your major characters. Either you kill them off, or marry them off, or whatever. You've got to dismiss them so that the reader is not left with like whatever happened to that guy or gal. And so that's important. And sometimes you can leave. Some people write stories with lots of characters. They forget to dismiss the major ones.
And it's frustrating in movies when there's dismissal or in TV shows or series you've watched. There's a
Right.
dismissal. There's no dismissal. What are your thoughts on that, Frank? When there isn't a dismissal in
Oh,
movies or
well, then
TV
you feel
shows?
cheated. So the reader feels cheated. I mean,
Yeah.
they're following this story, and they want to know what happens to these characters. That all of a sudden they disappear from the plot for no good reason, and they're just gone, and so the reader feels cheated.
All right. Best place people can check you out, Frank, is go to frankfiore.com. There'll be a link for each one of the rules in the short videos and also the text that we'll be posting this week. And also, you can contact Frank Fiore because next week on the podcast, we're going to talk about him as a writing coach and how he helps and how Paul helps people publish books and how I help in marketing. I appreciate it, guys.